Wow. You'll have to forgive me, I'm just getting over laryngitis. Whether it was psychological or not, I don't know. If you really want to know me and where I come from, just read the author's introduction. I don't want to explain it all to you. Other than I was adopted into a tribe, which is a very hard thing to understand for non-Indigenous people. It was hard for me to understand when it happened. But I'm just going to read the dedication. I dedicate this book, What the Land Had to Say, to the following three people. Mr. Dieball, my primary school teacher, who taught me that sometimes you have to fight to keep justice alive. The very wise old Aboriginal law man from the New South Wales South Coast who adopted me into his tribe and taught me that love can overcome any obstacle to make this world a better place, and that great things do come from small beginnings and from the heart. And the Aboriginal Birrik woman, a Birrik is a spirit woman who the land speaks through. An Aboriginal Birrik woman from the southwestern district of Victoria who showed me that there is a spiritual dimension to life that we all share, which gives life meaning as long as we keep truth and love alive. Okay. Now this book is divided into two suites. The first one is the 14 poems I want to do now on the Aboriginal aspects of what the land had to say. The other suite is just about Australia, how I saw it in other different ways, through love, through nature, homelessness. It deals with a whole variety of themes, that second suite in the book. The first suite, to me, is the most important part. Prelude is before 1788, the first three poems, and they each have a story around them, but time won't allow me to go too much into that. So I'll just let the poems speak for themselves. Night folds round, shadows touch a cavern deep inside the rocks, a giant sky god painted in red ochre on smoke-dark walls, his ancient visage sharpened by countless custodians whose hands shape the artist, time. The Fire Stick Farmers. This was inspired by a painting by an artist by the name of Fiona Hooper. I liked to be able to put this piece in because when they came in 1788, they came under they used a convention called the New Convention, which delineated the civilised nature of the Indigenous people as to whether they were worthy of being negotiated with for sovereignty or not. And in their ways of measuring, the Aboriginal people of Australia failed every one of their tests. One of them was farming. They didn't understand the nature of Aboriginal farming at all, and many other aspects of the culture they totally missed. Perhaps they wanted to miss them so that they could declare terra nullius, which would make it a much easier land grab, which is what happened. The Fire Stick Farmers. Fire sticks lick greenery black. Crackling leaves breathe white, yellow and purple into an evening sky. A rainbow lorikeet opens its wings, adrift upon a warm current of air. A platypus dreams in a tea-brown creek, safe in a womb bag of water. Hardwood seeds burst open to wait for a darker soil, mixed with ash and humus and moisture. A nearby valley echoes a fire dance. Didgeridoos commune with spirits who dwell within a timeless realm. Their dark eyes spill tears into a smouldering cloud. A still lake mirrors swirling figures while red flames leap from fern to shoreline, where tribal tongues sing life into a hungry land. I was told a story by an Aboriginal who said this is a common legend all around amongst Australian Aboriginals, that a couple of years before the coming of the white man in 1788, there was a sense of an incredible cataclysm was about to hit their culture, more potent and more destructive than even the Ice Age. And some of the elders in the tribes began to die as a consequence of this feeling of some terrible menace coming from over the waters. Whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. They believe that. So I wrote this poem in response to that omen. Swarms of bats glide through the light of a blood moon. Thunder hammers, clouds break. A curlew shrieks as it sinks into mist with eyes that speak of the wilderness of stars and the mysteries of breath. Now, what the land had to say, what the omen was all about. The first poem deals with 1788 itself, the tall ships of 1788. The camp was quiet. Only the old ones and the watchers were wide-eyed and listening. The watchers stood silently on the cliffs looking out to sea. The moon was full and stars were fires in the timeless black. The dingoes slept fitfully. Evil gunjas tormented their dreams. Occasionally a growl, a moan, a bark would echo through the stillness. The old ones quivered. They sensed the birth of a new horizon without a sun. The moon crept higher. Its light was filled with bad dreams. The elders knew that the Burais who slept had to be protected. Their dreams kept sacred, as the dreams of Burais must, if they are to see with the light of the sun and touch the dreams of the stars. The elders roamed quietly around the camp. They placed an initiation tooth in the sacred bag of each newborn warrior. The elders knew they could not sleep. They knew a battle was about to occur. No spears or nulla nullas would be called for, only the power of their totems. A cruel wind growled in the hills and the air in the camp grew ugly. The old ones sat, stifled by the presence of alien totems. The coals on the fire exploded. The sea raged on the rocks and the watchers stood mute on the cliffs, looking out to sea. Two dingoes roused from their sleep. They glared in rage. The dust sprang to life between the two, and they lunged at one another with claws and teeth bared. They grappled in a tearing scream of hate. They cowered as the wind sighed in the trees, and a tiredness overcame the watchers who stood mute on the cliffs, looking out to sea. The young warriors whispered in their sleep, drew a breath and heaved a sigh as an old one waned, tired. Death jangled in his chest. A howling of the people rose with the waning moon. The sun rose blood red, and the watchers knew the first blood of their people had been drawn when a white sail burned on the horizon. A sour smell fouled the air, and the dingoes growled their omens. Frontier violence, there was so much of it that I read, it made me sick. I couldn't write much about it other than to encapsulate it in as small categories, as small poetry as I could, because there's more than enough reflected in the later poems anyway. Nightmare. Restless grey fingers tear open the skin of the land. A monster awakes. Plunder. A furious crow watched a magpie tree fall under the noonday saw. Okay. Everything from here on in is in the first person, me speaking. What I experienced directly. Broome, Western Australia, 1981. I sat with lepers in an aluminium box, 6 foot by 10 foot, to house a family, 30 in one row by 20 in another. I walked across dry sand littered with medicine bottles, beer bottles, broken bottles, to a row of quiet tents, away from the violence, away from the shadow of the police station, where stood the only water tap to quench the thirst of 200 Aboriginal people. I sat with the anguish of old ones in love with life, old ones who cried in grief, old ones who have accepted the Catholic way but not denied the land, because they own no land and they own all. The meek ones, the dreaming ones who sing love, old ones who gathered pearl shells from the sea. With the pearl shells they built an altar out of respect for love, the foundation behind it all. Then they walked to the open sea, crying tears of salt. A sacred land. I was taken to a sacred site by 2 very close people, my brother-in-law and my wife of the day. They wanted to show me something about the spiritual dimension that is real, because they could see I was caught between my scientific Western mind and the influences I was coming under, living inside of Aboriginal culture and being shown all this stuff. Quite a privilege. Something I didn't recognise how privileged I was to get that close. I think Roland Robinson called it as near as the white man gets. A sacred land. I slept in the shade of a sacred land. A bush breeze spoke to me of ghost grey boughs, gum red flowers, and afternoon shadows on water blossoms. In the evening, moonbeams splashed over the land. Green mists rose where rivers snake, and dreams of sleeping creatures roused the silent wings of owls. I woke in the shadow of a sacred land. There sat the old man watching faces in the flames, both warmed and chilled by the open hearth of his memories. He spoke deep into twilight about smokestacks on his riverbanks, the wound that bleeds within his soul, of a shadow that breathes over his people, and of beauty that was old, the wisdom of a land beyond time. He took me down around the stones, spoke of a cave into the rock. He told me of a spirit there, where the tiger snake resides, and of the eagle's eyrie. Out in the wind a wild bird's song echoed inside the caverns and rippled along the billabong. Beside the loamy river we heard a woman's song. Her withered lingo mourned remains of murdered bones, the last massacre of her people back inside the stones. Her morning song flowed on the river, flowed on out to sea. A sunbeam burst through the salt mist and set her morning song free. If you listen to the breeze back inside the stones on a summer's afternoon, a black flower opens and hums a sacred tune. Strange fruit. With respect to Abel Mirapol, author of the song Strange Fruit, and Billie Holiday for her vocal rendition of the song. Must acknowledge. My wife was Aboriginal lady, went out one day with a lot of white feminist women And she came home really angry because their understanding of womanhood was so different to hers. And I said, okay, well, what is womanhood to you? Strange fruit. A perspective on the meaning of womanhood as shown to be by an old Aboriginal woman who had lost most of her tribe to massacres and disease during the last 2 centuries. She plucked a grapefruit and peeled the skin with fingernails bared. Pointing at the skin in the palm of her hand, she said, "This I will leave behind when I die, but it is not me." She tore the pith, wrenching it away like a blister from a cocoon. "This I will leave behind." The juices flowed, bittersweet blood. Hints of generations to come were spun in the air, and the room filled with mysteries as the ancient wove a lesson of the eternal. A seed lay exposed in the mould of its creation. This I am. You have to remember, during those massacre years, terrible warfare up to around the 1860s especially, the women gave up birthing. They didn't want to bring children into this world anymore. And there was a very big drop in Aboriginal birth rate. So the desire to repopulate is a very powerful thing in a culture that has been treated with such evil intent. And I understood what she said from that. Okay, I've tended to steer away from didactic poetry for fear that it's, you can get very, very much like a lecture. But Bob Dylan got away with it, so I thought, well, why not me? So I had a go at it. An experience where I went to a funeral with my wife in Redfern, and through the abject poverty to see that, and then come back to a very wealthy home. The two images just clapped, and I sat down and I wrote this word for word. It's one of those very rare poems that just come from inspiration. From the Corridors, Redfern, Sydney, 1984. I've seen your diamond rings, heard of your fur-lined underwear, stolen visions from your Sunday morning eyes, watched you roll along the cold streets where the stony gaze of Indigenous eyes glare at the back of your icy car. From the back room of the railway pub in Redfern, I felt the cold wind of desolate visions blow against my back, felt the hand of rage claw towards my throat. I've walked the black streets of Redfern, where hollow corridors behind open doors stare vacantly at the world, where the cruel draught of poverty whistled in my ears. Your corridors are locked and barred till I storm your moat with my credit card and see your character on your walls, read your character in your bookshelf, see your couch where you idle away your greedy hours in the banquet of your fantasy. I've seen the dreams of children shattered in the morning light, when the pangs of hunger have burgled them from their sleep, when the hollow ring of empty cupboards has driven them into the streets, where the only law of values means staying on your feet. I've heard it from the mouths of the hungry. The ghettos are the bones of your banquet. But in your room of rare books, you still parry with philosophies and play games with the wise words of the ancients. I've seen the fist raised, the winds of change blow cold off the land. Soliloquy Botany Bay, 1988. The Tall Ships of 1788 and this poem really are a contrast. 200 years later, bicentenary, Botany Bay Hotel, one Aboriginal man sitting in there surrounded by mostly non-Indigenous people. All that going on out in the streets. A lot of what was photographed was by the media was completely cut off the Aboriginal side of it. I was there down in the southwestern district of Victoria when the message stick went through inviting all Aboriginal people to come and join in this march against the 26th of January, the coming of the invasion fleet. It started a massive movement from all over Australia. You can get a lot of that stuff out of your libraries now. There's one called 1988. You've got to go and watch it. And it was like a big snake weaving through the streets, all the traditional people dressed up in all painted up, all their gear, clapsticks, dancing, chanting all the way through, followed by this massive tens of thousands of people, many of them non-Indigenous, which I was like, wow, look at this. You know, you don't realise how many non-Indigenous people are in there and understand it. 40% apparently from the vote, I put that at 6.8 million people, would have voted yes. Voted yes. Sorry. And I think that's a good beginning. And I think in truth-telling, why don't non-Indigenous people get up and tell what they see that they find disgusting about the way Aboriginal people are treated? And the two groups unify in this truth-telling. Because in that unity is a tremendous amount of strength. Without the two joining together, it won't get there. People like, well, I'm going to say me, you know, but there's plenty more out there. Why not get up there and start telling your truth? How you see and how much it disgusts you what's going on in this country. So, soliloquy, Botany Bay, 1988. Lantern candles glow red in the dim pub light. A harlequin nestles in the shadows, watching the babble of 1,000 voices. Like fish in a tank, the crowd swims through the smoke, unfolding currents spread in their wake. The dance of shades has begun, summoned by that shaman, wine. Faces open, beneath the armour of night. A drunken teardrop trails along a wet glass. Swaying ice cubes clink in rhythm, tousled hair and tired grins. The harlequin begins to swim. Dandelion eyes pollinate the air, startling an unbedded rose. The thief of innocent hearts steals a sunbeam and plats it in her golden hair. Dark corners and crevices, crimson fire in glittering eyes, the cannibalistic talk of criminals bent on despair. Lizard tongues lick at the air, plotting the downfall of souls. A Birrick man whose songlines were stolen isolates a far corner. A no man's land of static silence charges the atmosphere surrounding him. Bombarded by a sea of glances, his solemn whirlpool gaze confronts flashes of ice blue. Confused green sympathy shrinks away. Wide brown ogles shamelessly entranced. A harmless drunk bumps his table, then turns to meet those whirlpool eyes, rivets in shock, and like a wounded child in an unmappable land, staggers on. To the cacophony of 1,000 voices, he tilts his glass in fine farewell and vanishes into soliloquy. The next poem, Nomad. I've always loved what songlines actually mean. I've really been intrigued by what it actually means, because you see these stories, these songline stories, and they just seem so simple on the surface. And then to get inside them, you realise there's a whole lessons being taught through these song lines to the young when they're taken out to become men. And they sing the land, and it's actually telling how the ecology works, how to treat it. When it's time for a fire to happen, and when it's time to let it lay fallow. The song lines have so much to teach about ecology. And I often wonder, when humanity, if or when we become extinct, what the song line's going to be then. Who's going to write that one? Mother Nature writes it. And we humans interpret it. Who's going to be around to interpret what humanity was if or when we ever become extinct? Which by the looks of it isn't too far off. So I wrote this poem with that in mind. Nomad. Silent light of the evening star rises behind a blue moon. Beneath the warm mystery of a gypsy night, a town enshrouds itself in cold neon. Inside the streets, streams of faces caught within their visions. Bag ladies bunch in the mouth of an alleyway, pass a bottle and stare into an empty dream. An industrial sun at midnight blazes across the delta. At the edge of town, a quiet traveller passes into a world of starlight. He follows a heart of Stone Age wisdom and listens to the harmony of timeless creation. He follows the silence that waits in the core of a violent earth to compose the song of humanity. Just trying to hold on to this voice. This is hardcore truth that was told to me by my ex and what she puts up with every day. Like what every single Aboriginal woman in a racist town would have to go through. And this is what she goes through. I know a lady who for her, history is an agony. Her people were murdered systematically and randomly. She lives in a town here in Australia. She hides because she feels surrounded by the enemy. She tells me in supermarkets, the locals stare at her with hatred in their eyes. Taxi drivers terrify her because she's in their clutches once the doors are shut and the driving begins and they get to know where she lives. She tells me nights are the worst when rocks rain down on her corrugated iron roof and the anonymous voice in her telephone at midnight telling her what he's going to do if she doesn't leave town. She tells me not far from where she lives, 2 centuries ago, many of her tribe died in agony, poisoned by flour, laced with arsenic, brought to her land by the invaders. I found a diary written by a settler 2 centuries ago. He heard wailing in the bush. He found dead babies, their blue lips glued to the poisoned breasts of their dead mothers. She tells me her truth. She doesn't lie. She has nothing to gain. She has left me haunted by the images she lives with every day. This poem, second last, so I did want to read one more from another section. This is the last one in this sequence. It's called The Bird. It's retrospective, written from where I live now, just reflecting on what I'd been through in those 14 years. It has an epigraph A quote from an Aboriginal elder. A bird. It's a place where many of my people were massacred. It's in a valley where the birds don't sing, as told to me by a tribal elder. The trees outside my window are twisting in the wind. Beyond Sugarloaf's distant peak, I know the angry land that stretches all the way to Weeper and west across to Broome. I've seen her dying rivers and dust bowls that once were green. It's strange to think of all the people I met along the way, their hopes, their moods, the fires we shared with the blaze of desert stars. On the open plains of the Nullarbor, I smoked with the brown-skinned people. They told me of a bird that had followed me from Broome. It's Birrick, Spirit, see you safe to your home. In the evening they sang their songs. By the morning they were gone, like shimmers off the sand in the midday sun. Behind the walls of the Grampians, I saw the ruins of a stone hut village. Fish traps clung to the floor of a creek that swelled and emptied with the changing seasons. When the moon came up, I heard the rhythm of pounding feet, smelled odours of oil and sweat. Ceremonial rings scored the earth where tribes had celebrated origin and birth. There was gratitude here. In the cold grey of a wet autumn morning, the wind roused me from my dreams. Aromas of decay rose off a stream in the valley where the birds didn't sing. I walked through mist to the heart of silence. An elder said, remember this day. Back on the Hume I knew freedom. I'd learned what the land had to say. A bird is perched on the bough of a tree outside my window. It waits for me. And the last poem is, I think, it's just to take us out of that dimension for a moment, to realise we are all in the same dimension together. We're all walking around in eternity now. We don't have to wait to die to get there, we're in it now. And I don't think a lot of people realise that sometimes. So I wrote this poem to sort of just bring us all together as one human, lot of human beings. We're not separate races, we're human beings. We're all together. All this race stuff, it's just a concept. Like nations. Nations were followed empires, didn't they? Had empires, now we've got nations. And now look at that's caused at each other's throats every day. So I called this one Boundless, and it's about Newcastle. On the shores of Ash Island there is a cove shaped as a horseshoe made of sand and seashells. The smell of salt is thick here, and brown seaweed clings like mermaids' fingers to an ancient rock that juts above the water just before the ocean makes its presence felt. Its bogey, the undertow, can drag you out beyond the lights of Stockton to a place where even Nobby's lighthouse disappears. I go there sometimes, to that place beyond the lights. I lie there in a wooden skiff, my head upon a pillow, propped against the prow, where I watch the stars and listen to the lapping wet and divine the depth below me. There is peace here, a peace I've never known before, a sense of things, of meanings that take no shape in words. I go there sometimes, to that place of stars, where sky and sea are mirrored and horizons don't exist. Thank you.